income tax and these breaks are always valuable, but certainly are not the end of the tunnel. It's not the end of the road. It's at best an enabler. Let's draw a larger line in front of the income tax break rather than struggling and remaining restricted only around that issue.
All right, sir. I'll have one quick question for you, and then we'll move on to other panelists here. Sir, I think in my discussions again with the industry over the last couple of days, one of the other things very important things that came up, especially in industry like the pharma industry, they spend billions of dollars in research and development. And in India, when it comes to IP and enforcing IP, the gray areas between that emanate from the fact that the state and the center sometimes seem a bit disjointed and disconnected, apparently is also hurting further investments from coming into R&D. How do you see Government of India, in fact, addressing this issue?
In what way does the state come into the picture?
Well, the central, of course, the DCGI, in fact, works with the investor or the industry to, confer IP, and then the state actually gives the authority or the permission to manufacture. So when this is disjointed, and when somebody, in fact, the gentleman who spoke to me said he had 30 infringement, IP infringement cases filed in the last few years, so which is a huge number, and this is one organization.
Well, I know that the IP department has been trying to reorient itself, and when I was doing the review of the department about a couple of months ago, the numbers that they shared with me in terms of their ramping up their own operations, the speed with which they are able to give out patents or copyright licenses, trademarks, has significantly been ramped up. And my own direction to the IP offices that we'll have to look at ensuring that all applications get cleared faster than anywhere else in the world. And that's the effort on which we are moving in terms of the speed of action for any request that the industry makes to the IP office. In terms of infringement, what I believe is the industry would like us to give out more information in the public domain about the patents that are registered. And I think there are two schools of thought. There is, of course, the issue of infringement, but on the other hand, there is the concerns around evergreening of patents. And what I was explained was that this is something which is contraindicatory to each other, and it's still an area where we've not yet come to an ideal world situation. But I've had some engagement with pharma industry. Mr. Sanghvi also met me and shared some of his thoughts about what should be done to reconcile these two issues. But with an open mind, we are willing to engage with the industry. We are willing to talk to the states. In fact, as recently as yesterday, I have proposed to the Department for Promoting Industry and Internal Trade, DPIIT, that we should look at a framework in which the states and the center come to a legally binding agreement amongst themselves to work as partners, to work in support of each other in the promotion of industry, so that industry can get a stable, simple, and a predictable regulatory framework. And any state which infringes on that, or which does not uphold the sanctity of contracts or sanctity of any of these patent infringements, for example, or commitments made by one government being changed by another government or contested by another government, I think these are areas that the center is taking very seriously, and we will have to have some kind of a reward or penalty mechanism even between the center and states, so that the image of India as a country can be maintained, and the respect that India enjoys today worldwide should not be harmed by the actions of one or two delinquent states at any point of time. But I accept your point that we will have to ensure that such patent infringements are taken to task very seriously, very quickly, and the center and states will all have to work together on this.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for that elaborate answer, sir. Vas? What we saw in the video there, the grandfather goes to Basel as an intern, and the prodigal grandson returns to be the CEO of Novartis. Nothing less than a Bollywood movie, yeah? Nothing short of a Bollywood movie plot. Congratulations on all the success. We are absolutely proud and thrilled to have you leading Novartis in the world and putting India in the world map. So many, many congratulations. A big round of applause for Vas. Vas, let me quickly ask you a question. I know you're big on convergence of different spheres of industry. Hyderabad is hub, not just for Novartis. This is not just Novartis' second largest office in the world, but Hyderabad is also home to Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Uber, Salesforce, ServiceNow. All of their second largest offices in the world today are right here. I know you're big on convergence. So this whole sphere of IT and life sciences, I know you also have entered this amazing sphere of digital drug discovery. Can you tell us a bit more about the opportunities, this convergence presence, because the world is evolving every day. We would like to hear from you.
Yes, and thank you, and thank you again for the kind words. Hyderabad is extraordinary, and having visited here since, in some form or another, since 2009, seeing how the ecosystem around our campus has exploded has been extraordinary. So now, of course, we see all of the sectors, but particularly the tech sector. And what we see is a few different areas where we believe technology will transform a company like Novartis, but also the entire sector. The first is just in how we operate. When you look at companies like ours, multinational companies, we operate in 150 countries, 108,000 people. Whether it's in how we run our clinical trials and how we can use machine learning, predictive analytics to run large-scale operations around the world, whether it's in our manufacturing centers where we can now increasingly use AI to better optimize our supply chains and optimize our manufacturing. We have sales representatives, 10,000 sales representatives who have an AI-generated insight given to them every morning on how to spend their day. We even have built in Hyderabad procurement engines that help us better spend the $16 billion we spend every year. So transforming our own operations is going to be significant, and we do that through partnerships. We have a significant partnership with Amazon, we have a significant partnership with Microsoft, and a range of other partnerships. The second big trend that will happen or is already happening is how do we mine the large data sets in healthcare. And those data sets, I think the best understood use case is mining medical images. So medical images, whether they're x-rays, scans of the retina, CT scans, and how you can use those scans to better diagnose disease, hopefully find different patient populations. That's one very significant use case. But we see many others. When you mine large data sets, can you better understand which patients might go into heart failure decompensation, or which patients might have a flare of their rheumatological illness? Clearly, those data sets are going to be very important. Some countries are very advanced. We work with Tencent in China on a major partnership in heart failure. We just announced a major partnership with the UK government to look at how to use large-scale data sets in cholesterol lowering as well. So these things are happening. I believe in the next 10 years, those data sets will rapidly transform how we diagnose and manage patients. The big unknown is, can you use AI to better understand human biology? And there are companies actually here in Hyderabad working on it. But sometimes we underestimate how magical it is we find any medicines at all. I like to tell audiences that in the history of the US FDA, it's only approved 100 years. It's only approved about 1,500 medicines. There's only about 600 validated drug targets we've ever found. This is an industry that spends about $175 to $200 billion a year in R&D. And we're lucky if we find 20 new medicines in the whole world in a year. And why is that? It's because in the human body you have 40 trillion cells. Every cell has 1 trillion molecules, and the complexity is just vast. And there's so much we don't understand in the 4 billion years of evolution that's in every one of us. So that's the big opportunity. Can we use AI to find new drugs that we would have never found before? That's the hope. We're investing in it. Many great companies here in India are investing in it. And if we could use that AI combined with scientific human ingenuity to find drugs we wouldn't have found before, maybe double the number of new medicines we find, that would, of course, be a huge, huge breakthrough.
Fascinating, fascinating. We look forward to the day when we have more happening in AI with Novartis, with Biome, and with all the cool things that you're doing here. Jan, you heard the Honorable Minister. You heard him clearly, and his commitment to IP, his commitment to ensuring that we have more and more happening in your sphere of work. The one thing I wanted to ask you, in fact, the city that you sit in right now is not only home to India's 35% of Indian pharmaceuticals being produced from here, we are also the vaccine capital of the world. In fact, 35% of global vaccines are produced from Hyderabad, but we are greedy. We want more. So how do we get a company like Merck to come into India, to look at manufacturing opportunities, to look at doing more here? What do you say are the 1, 2, and 3 mission critical things to the Honorable Minister and myself on making this happen? I want to put you in the spot here.
Thanks for a great question. Honorable Ministers, I'd like to go back to Minister Goyal, who said that what we are really all trying to do is to think about having people here that are healthy, because we know that when people in India are healthy, that they will be productive and that you will create wealth. And actually the coronavirus outbreak in China right now clearly demonstrates that. Now, the best impact by far that you can have on human health is vaccination. It's prevention of disease. And so what many of the leading companies continuously are doing is continuing to strive to, on the one hand, develop new vaccines, and on the other hand, to make sure that we have enough supply for the diseases that need these vaccines. What we are looking for in countries across the world is really a mix. On the one hand, we're looking for a local market where there is actually a remuneration of all of the effort that companies have done to bring these vaccines to the market. And of course, that's going to be very different by country depending on the macroeconomic conditions of the country, but you're seeking for some form of remuneration. Secondly, the easier the regulatory framework, the better, the more achievable it is for us to deliver vaccines. To give you an example, many vaccines today are in short supply across the world, and sometimes we find ourselves in a situation that a certain country that had asked for a vaccine may not need to supply, and we want to deliver that to the country next door. And because of regulatory barriers, it's very, very difficult to do that. So how can we make it as easy as possible from a regulatory point of view? And then, of course, last but not least, this element of intellectual property. How do we make sure that also vaccines that will be invented in India are kind of protected in the right way? So with that, I know India, with more than 1 billion people, will be, incredibly important for all of us, both from making a difference for the people that need the vaccines, as well as in terms of the business. It's a real win-win.
I completely endorse your opinion on immunization and vaccines. But let me quickly also ask you, what's your view on price control? What's your view on making sure that the medicine is affordable and also accessible, and therefore some sort of regulatory measures that are brought in by governments and price control? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, affordability is a word that we hear across the world everywhere these days. Even in the US, the word affordability is used on a continuous basis. I actually prefer the word access. And access is really multifaceted. It starts with making sure that you have the right healthcare system in place that diagnoses people, that you then have the right treatment with the right facilities, and that you also have the right follow-up. Of course, as an industry, we need to think about the differences between a country like India versus a country like the United States in terms of how we set responsible pricing. However, again, it's a fallacy to think that it's all about price. And let me give you one very specific Indian example. In India, half of all the women suffer from anemia. Now, you have drugs to treat iron deficiency that cost only 1 to 2 rupees a day. So this is not a question of price. So what we all should be focusing on to make a difference for the people of India is access. How do we ensure that people have access through diagnosis, treatment, and the appropriate follow-up and medication?
Thank you. Thank you. And Dilip Bhai, let me quickly bring you into the discussion. Indian pharma industry and its success. We've largely relied on generics, in the last few decades. Now, you have the Union Commerce Minister here. What would you want Government of India and state governments in India to do so that we have Indian pharma industry also move up the product value chain and start looking at more opportunities in R&D, start discovering our own molecules? I know Vas said only 20 of them get discovered, even though you spend billions of dollars, but still, I think it's a chance worth taking. So, what is it that you would want to tell the Honorable Minister and myself and to the audience that are watching us? What can Indian industry do to move up the product value chain? What is it that the government should be doing?
I think you've raised a very important issue at the stage at which our industry is right now. If I see globally, Indian companies are an important player in the generic business, but that's a relatively small subset of the total global business. Even though in the US and in
Dilip Bhai, can you please move the mic close to you, please?
Even in the US or other markets, more than 85% of the prescriptions are filled with generics. The value terms, it's a very small percentage of the global markets. And the challenge for Indian companies are a little bit different than what you would talk about for global companies. And that's what I think, if we have to transition from where we are to start participating in the innovative global business, then we will have to do a lot of things very differently from the way in which we've done in the past. Vas talked about close to $200 billion being spent in research every year. But if I look at in India, companies would be spending less than 1.5% of that money. And because we don't spend as much money on innovation, there is not a single drug discovered in India which is yet in the global markets. So I would request Piyush Bhai to reconsider his thinking in terms of India is a great country and a very large market, but in terms of global market, we're still a very small market because the total business in India is around $20 billion, which would constitute maybe less than 2% of the global market. So how do we, generating revenue in India, participate in the global market, investing with large multinational companies so that we can compete? Because I think the picture that we see in front of us is that it's almost like what happens in Star Trek. You allow body to regenerate, you understand at biological and at cellular level what is happening. And that is true, and Indian companies are enabling technologies to reach there. But for Indian companies to invest in this kind of innovation will require an ecosystem to be developed, starting with that getting strengthened in our institutes, because what I see when we are hiring people, technology for biologics is something that we need to strengthen. But as I see, we are gradually moving towards that, and maybe in next 5 years, at least Sun Pharma will have 1 or 2 innovative products, and maybe a few other companies will also have products in market. And as we start participating in the global market and generate revenues which will allow us to invest what is required to compete globally, I think we will be able to grow. But first of all, I think our major problem is access to high quality, affordable medicine for more than 1 billion people that we have in this country. And for that, what I think is required is technology which will allow us to produce high cost products, say like modular sterile technology, so that you don't need to sustain very high cost aseptic manufacturing facilities, or continuous manufacturing so that we can reduce cost of operation as well as manufacturing cost. So I think we have multiple options, but I think our industry has done very well in the past in terms of learning from others and continuously evolving, and we will continue to evolve.
Thank you, Dilip bhai. Let me just, Mr. Piramil, I'll just come to you in a minute. I'll quickly go to Satish and come to you. Satish, you're not only the chairman of Reddy Labs, you're also now at the head of Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance. So please tell the Honorable Minister and the audience, what do you think are the top three challenges that the Indian industry is facing today? Minister talked about a couple of things which may have been music to your ears. Clinical trials, the discussion that he had with the Honorable Prime Minister. He also talked about drawing a bigger line and not just looking at the fiscal incentives possibly, and maybe he has something up his sleeve which we don't know about. Maybe he'll share it with you in confidence, I don't know. But Satish, tell us the top three things that the Indian industry, from your perspective as the head of IPA.
Sure. So I think clearly, as Dilip has explained, we need to move to the next stage of value addition for the industry, which is moving from generics to innovation. I think it's very critical because sometimes it's also good to see from the past in terms of capabilities that India has. So does India have capability to discover drugs? Yes. They have launched products in the Indian market, but we still have a gap, which is that a product discovered in India has never reached the global market because it's risky, it's expensive, it needs a sustained level of investments where the returns are not going to be that easy. So once we are faced with the situation, our request to the Honorable Minister would be, although he pointed out that income tax incentives are not the way to go, one of the reasons why we feel it very strongly is also from an experience that we have had as a company, Dr. Reddy's, in the past. Way back in 1992, we're one of the first private sectors largely generating revenues from APIs and partly formulations in India. We invested into drug discovery. So that was the vision of our founder, Dr. Ranjit Reddy, at that point of time. And we proved the capabilities. By 97, 98, we in fact licensed a product to Novartis in the PPAR class of compounds. But then the whole class of compounds came under a cloud, and that's why we had to shelve it. So it's that risky. So even though company expanded, it was getting into other markets, making profits, it is not enough to sustain in terms of what we need to do. So especially when we look at things like tax incentives, all we are asking for is an extension, of the 200% exemptions, which went down to 150%. If it comes down on April 1st to nothing, right? So it becomes that much more difficult for companies to take risks. So that's one key thing on why we keep asking for incentives. The second part, I think, is again looking at the current situation, right? Especially when it refers to APIs. Again, it's interesting to go back to what was our position maybe way back in the 90s or early 80s to 90s. We were one of the largest producers of major APIs in the world. We were actually supplying APIs to most of the markets until, say, if you see what happened in the 90s, we ceded the situation to China. And again, we can go into various reasons, economies of scale, the subsidies which China gave and all that. And then once again, if you go back to the situation at this point of time, the present situation, I think it presents a wonderful opportunity because of this crisis for us to get back into the game, keeping the long term in mind, and also looking at something which is very important, which is competitiveness, right? So this is where I think Indians can again prove themselves. And here again, there is a requirement from the government also to step in to provide, like Honorable Minister KTR has said, that if we have a large infrastructure, industrial park, like a pharma city coming up, or any other clusters which we have across in India, if we give it that necessary impetus, that's something which can make a difference for a sustainable, long-term competitiveness for the API industry. Because again, all I'm saying in both the things that I've said so far is that we have the capability, we can be competitive, we have proved that in the past, except that we need that extra push from the government and also the extra sweetener so that we can get to the next step. The last three one, because you asked for three. The third one would clearly be about, this whole regulatory environment, right? So whether it concerns environmental clearances, which is applicable especially to API industry, where we find a lot of bottlenecks, both at the central level as well as the state level, more so at the state level, sometimes in some particular clusters. It requires a lot of time, to get the approvals.
Yes.
Right? So again, the regulation is good for a certain reason, but if it becomes so complicated and then it takes a lot of time, we are again losing that competitive edge. So that's something which we need to look at. And also I think when I also talk about the clearances, even the regulatory pathway, whether it's manufacturing license or things like that, I think these have to help us in the ease of doing business. So again, I would go back to the point saying competitiveness, right? So let's not lose this advantage. We had this big advantage. At this point of time, we need to get back to that. That would be my three things.
Thank you, Satish. Mr. Piramal, you heard Satish Reddy. He says cost-intensive business, cost-intensive industry, also combined with the fact that there is a long gestation for regulatory approvals. Therefore, we need incentives. And also, Satish talked about the fact that there's a huge opportunity, cost competitiveness, competitive advantage that India should not lose. You're witnessing what's happening in China and the consequences of industry trying to also move to different parts of the world and relocate. Now, let me ask you two things. Firstly, again, the same question that I asked Satish. What would you like to say to the Honorable Minister in terms of 1, 2, 3 from the Government of India? And secondly, I see the industry diversifying. I see a lot of you talking about biosimilars, OTCs. I know you have a huge plant here in Digwal, and then, I also know that you've announced expansion. You also promised me that you'll write me a fat check after the event today. I'm thankful to you for that. But sir, before we get to that, I'd like to hear from you on how can government support you with respect to these diversification efforts of yours, and also, more importantly, like I said, in ensuring India retains its cost competitive advantage.
With your permission, let me first comment a little bit on what Mr. Piyush Goyal said, that we need to move to the next level of engagement. I think if you look at the success of the Indian pharmaceutical industry, a lot of it was based on how we were able to supply generic formulations in the US. My own feeling is that this is now history. Because of the great competition, and what's happened in the US is that today there are just 3 or 4 big buyers in the US, and they're bringing down the cost so much of that Indian companies are actually profitability is at a strain. So we need to move to the next level, and I believe that's where we need to move from generics to innovation. Innovation is a long process. You know that it will take years and years to go, at least 10, 15 years, and a lot of investment. So I thought we could do a sort of one step ahead in the sense that we do innovation, that we supply to innovative drugs for large companies or for companies which have patents. We manufacture them in India, we develop them in India, and that's how we come to learn how to do innovative products. So we talk about R&D, but if I have to be honest, most of us in India do D, not the R part of it. So how do we focus more on R is the second thing that I would say. So to get research, we need to create that ecosystem which some of my colleagues talked about. That ecosystem would mean something like your pharma city, where there is a lot of, you create that critical mass of people, of highly qualified people. They like to be attracted to the same place. I think we create more such centers. We create such centers in universities, and that's where I think the government needs to invest money in education. So it's not giving to a particular company, which I know this government is a little hesitant to do, but why can't we give it to universities and create centers of excellence in doing research? Development we are good at, but we are not good at research. We are good at chemistry, but we are not good at biology. So can we invest more in that? The minister talked about clinical trials. I think we used to have, we have one of the largest R&D facilities in India at a time, but we